My name is Irene, and I'm just a simple girl from a modest family. I graduated from college and started working as a nurse at City General Hospital. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved helping people and making a difference in their lives. On that fateful day, I was rushing through the emergency room, arms full of supplies, when the doors burst open. Two paramedics wheeled in a stretcher, and on it lay a man in a torn leather jacket and shattered motorcycle helmet. "What happened?" I asked, immediately setting down my load and moving to assist. "Rich boy on a fancy bike lost control," one of the paramedics grunted. "Hit a guardrail. Lucky his gear held up, or he'd be in worse shape." Dr. Thompson, the attending physician, hurried over. "Irene, I need your help here." We worked quickly, removing the man's protective gear and assessing his injuries. Despite the severity of the crash, he seemed to have escaped with only a broken arm and some nasty bruises. As we cut away his shirt, I couldn't help but notice his toned physique and the expensive watch on his wrist. Where am I?" the man groaned, regaining consciousness. "You're at City General," I told him softly. "You've been in an accident, but you're going to be okay." His eyes fluttered open, revealing startling blue irises. He looked at me, dazed, then managed a weak smile. "An angel," he mumbled, before passing out again. I felt my cheeks flush and quickly busied myself with preparing his drip. "Looks like you've got an admirer, Irene," Dr. Thompson chuckled. "This is Jake Thornton, son of Richard Thornton. You know, the guy who owns half the city?" Over the next few days, I found myself assigned to Jake's room more often than not. He was healing well, but his cocky attitude was beginning to grate on my nerves. "Hey, Nurse Angel," he'd call out whenever I entered. "Come to make my day brighter?" I'd roll my eyes, trying to hide my blush. "I'm here to check your vitals, Mr. Thornton. Nothing more." Despite his arrogance, there was something about Jake that intrigued me. He was more than just a rich boy with a pretty face. When he thought I wasn't looking, I'd catch him reading complex financial reports or speaking fluent Mandarin on his phone. On the day of his discharge, I felt an unexpected pang of sadness. I told myself it was ridiculous, he was just another patient, and an annoying one at that. "Well, Nurse Angel," Jake said as he gathered his things, "I guess this is goodbye." "Take care, Mr. Thornton," I replied professionally. "Try to stay off motorcycles for a while." A week after Jake's discharge, I was going about my usual routine at the hospital. It was a quiet afternoon, and I was updating patient charts at the nurse's station when I heard a familiar voice. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Nurse Angel. Have you seen her?" I looked up, startled to see Jake Thornton standing there, a bouquet of flowers in his hand and that cocky grin on his face. He was dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Mr. Thornton," I said, feeling my cheeks warm. "What are you doing here? Is everything all right with your arm?" He chuckled. "Please, call me Jake. And my arm's fine, thanks to your excellent care. These are for you, by the way." He handed me the flowers. I accepted them awkwardly, aware of my coworkers' curious stares. "Thank you, but why?" "Because I'm asking you out on a date," he said bluntly. "And I'm hoping these might persuade you to say yes." Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. "Okay, one dinner. But that's it." Jake's face lit up. "Great. I'll pick you up at 8. Wear something nice." As he strode out of the hospital, leaving me standing there with a bouquet of expensive flowers, I couldn't help but wonder what I'd just gotten myself into. That night, I agonized over what to wear. My closet was full of practical clothes for work, nothing suitable for a date with someone like Jake Thornton. I finally settled on a simple black dress, the only one I owned. At 8 o'clock sharp, a sleek black car pulled up outside my modest apartment building. Jake stepped out, looking like he'd just walked off a magazine cover in his tailored suit. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes appreciative as he opened the car door for me. The restaurant he took me to was the kind of place I'd only ever seen in movies. Crystal chandeliers, soft piano music, waiters in tuxedos, It was all so overwhelming. "Relax," Jake said, noticing my discomfort. "It's just dinner." But it wasn't just dinner. It was the beginning of something I never could have anticipated. As we talked, I discovered that beneath his cocky exterior, Jake was intelligent, funny, and surprisingly down-to-earth. He told me about his work as a financial director in his father's company, and I found myself sharing stories about my life and my passion for nursing. "You know," Jake said as we were finishing dessert, "I've dated a lot of women, but I've never met anyone quite like you, Irene." I laughed. "I'm sure you say that to all the girls." "No," he said, his tone serious. "I mean it. You're real. Genuine. It's refreshing." As he drove me home that night, I realized that I was in dangerous territory. But when he kissed me goodnight, soft and sweet, all my reservations melted away. And as I watched his car disappear into the night, I knew that my life was never going to be the same again. The weeks that followed were like a dream. Jake and I started dating regularly, and I found myself falling harder for him with each passing day. But reality had a way of intruding on our fairy tale. The first time Jake took me to meet his parents, I knew immediately that they disapproved of me. "So, Irene," Jake's mother, Elizabeth Thornton, said coolly, "Jake tells us you're a nurse?" I nodded, trying to hide my nervousness. "Yes, at City General." "How quaint," she replied, her tone making it clear she thought it was anything but. Jake's father, Richard, barely looked up from his newspaper. "And your family? What do they do?" "My father's a retired police officer, and my mother's a teacher," I said proudly. Elizabeth exchanged a look with her husband that spoke volumes. It was clear they thought I wasn't good enough for their son. As we left that night, Jake squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Don't worry about them," he said. "They'll come around eventually." But I wasn't so sure. The disapproval of Jake's parents cast a shadow over our relationship, one that I couldn't quite shake. Despite this, Jake and I grew closer. He showered me with affection and gifts, taking me to places I'd only ever dreamed of. But I never felt comfortable in his world of wealth and privilege. I was always acutely aware of how different we were. One night, after a particularly lavish date, I confronted Jake about it. "Why me?" I asked. "You could have any woman you want. Someone from your world. Why choose a simple nurse?" Jake cupped my face in his hands. "Because you're real, Irene. You're not with me for my money or my name. You see me for who I really am." His words touched me deeply, and I pushed my doubts aside. I loved Jake, and he loved me. Wasn't that all that mattered? 6 months into our relationship, Jake proposed. It wasn't a grand, elaborate affair, just the two of us, on the rooftop of my apartment building under the stars. It was perfect. We decided on a simple ceremony, much to the dismay of Jake's parents. But Jake stood firm, insisting that it was our day, not theirs. As I walked down the aisle, seeing Jake's beaming face, I felt like my heart might burst with happiness. This was the beginning of our forever. After the wedding, we moved into Jake's luxury apartment. It was bigger than any place I'd ever lived, with a view of the city that took my breath away. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton," Jake said, scooping me up in his arms as we crossed the threshold. I giggled, still not used to my new name. "I love you, Mr. Thornton." Married life with Jake started off beautifully. We settled into a routine in our luxurious apartment, and I continued working part-time at the hospital. A few months after our wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. Jake was overjoyed when I told him the news. "We're going to be parents," he exclaimed, spinning me around in our living room. "I can't wait to meet our little one." The pregnancy was relatively easy, and 9 months later, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. We named her Lily. Jake was by my side throughout the delivery, holding my hand and encouraging me. To my surprise, Jake's parents seemed to soften a bit after Lily was born. They doted on their granddaughter, showering her with gifts and attention. However, their attitude towards me remained cool and distant. "At least you managed to give Jake an heir," Elizabeth said during one of their visits, her tone a mix of approval and condescension. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that Lily deserved to have a relationship with her grandparents, regardless of how they treated me. As the months passed, I noticed subtle changes in Jake. He started working longer hours at his father's company, often coming home late and exhausted. Our conversations became shorter, more superficial. He'd ask me to prepare his suits and shine his shoes, but rarely inquired about my day or how I was feeling. One evening, as I was putting Lily to bed, Jake came home later than usual. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. "Working late," he replied tersely. "There's a big merger coming up. I need to be prepared." I nodded, unconvinced. "I made dinner. It's in the fridge if you want to heat it up." Jake waved his hand dismissively. "I already ate at the office." This became our new normal. Jake would come home late, barely acknowledge me or Lily, and retreat to his home office. I tried to talk to him about it, but he always had an excuse. "I'm doing this for us, Irene," he'd say. "For our future. You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under." I felt a growing distance between us, a chasm I didn't know how to bridge. The man I married, the one who had swept me off my feet, seemed to be disappearing before my eyes. One day, I received an unexpected call from Elizabeth, Jake's mother. "Irene," she said, her voice cold and disapproving. "I hope you realize you're not fulfilling your duties as the wife of a financial director." Confused and hurt, I asked, "What do you mean?" "You didn't even bother to come to the corporate party last night," she replied. "Though perhaps it's for the best. You would have stood out among the gorgeous women there, and not in a good way." My heart sank. I hadn't known about any corporate party. Jake hadn't mentioned it to me. That evening, when Jake came home, I confronted him. "Why didn't you invite me to the corporate party?" Jake's face hardened. "Irene, let's be honest. You're too simple for those events. I'd be embarrassed to have you there." His words cut deep, confirming my worst fears. The man I loved, the one who had once called me real and genuine, now found me embarrassing. The weeks following Jake's cruel words were tense. We barely spoke. I threw myself into caring for Lily and my work at the hospital, trying to ignore the growing pit in my stomach. One evening, Jake called to say he was staying late at work again. I decided to use the quiet time to clean up a bit. As I tidied his home office, I noticed his computer was on, the screen glowing softly in the dim room. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the mouse. I knew I shouldn't, but something compelled me to look. To my surprise, the computer wasn't password protected. With a shaky hand, I opened his email. What I found shattered my world. There, in black and white, was an email exchange between Jake and a woman named Vanessa. As I read through their correspondence, my heart pounded in my chest. They weren't just co-workers, they were lovers. They mocked me, calling me a hen, a fool, a redneck without taste. Jake praised Vanessa's skills in bed, while dismissing me as dull and unattractive. With trembling hands, I copied all the correspondence I could find onto a USB drive. I needed proof, something concrete to confront Jake with. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning as Jake's words echoed in my mind. When he finally came home the next morning, I was waiting for him in the living room, Lily asleep in her crib. "We need to talk," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I know about Vanessa." His face paled for a moment, before a smirk settled on his lips. "Come on, Irene. Did you really think someone like me would be satisfied with someone like you? Vanessa is everything you're not: beautiful, sophisticated, amazing in bed." Each word was like a knife to my heart. "I'm your wife," I whispered. "The mother of your child." "And that's all you'll ever be," he sneered. "I'm not giving up Vanessa. You'll just have to deal with it." In that moment, something inside me snapped. "No," I said firmly. "I won't deal with it. This marriage is over, Jake." His smirk faltered. "You can't leave me. You have nowhere to go, no money of your own." I'd rather be poor and alone than stay with a cheating bastard like you, I spat. I rushed to Lily's room, scooped her up, and grabbed the pre-packed bag I'd prepared earlier. As I headed for the door, Jake called out. "You'll regret this, Irene." "I'll make sure of it." I turned to face him one last time. "No, Jake. You're the one who's going to regret this." With those words, I walked out of our luxury apartment, my daughter in my arms and my heart in pieces. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I was done being Jake Thornton's fool. The taxi pulled up to my parents' modest home, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. My mother opened the door before I could even knock, concern etched on her face. "Irene, what's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, taking in my tear-stained face and Lily in my arms. "Mom," I choked out, "Jake, he's been cheating on me." My father appeared behind her, his expression hardening. "That bastard," he muttered, ushering us inside. Over the next few hours, I poured out the whole sordid story to my parents. They were furious but supportive, insisting that Lily and I stay with them as long as we needed. But Jake wasn't content with just ending our marriage. He wanted to destroy me completely. I was served with court papers. He was suing for full custody of Lily, claiming I was an unfit mother. The allegations in the lawsuit made me sick. Jake painted me as unstable, neglectful, an alcoholic who cheated on him. Every word was a lie, but I knew how powerful the Thorntons were. My saving grace came in the form of the USB drive I'd taken from Jake's computer. In court, his smug expression faltered as my lawyer presented the evidence. The judge, a no-nonsense woman, saw right through his lies. In the end, I was granted primary custody of Lily, with Jake ordered to pay a hefty amount in child support and alimony. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. A few weeks later, as I was settling into life at my parents' house, a sleek car pulled up outside. Jake stepped out, followed by a stunning woman I assumed was Vanessa. "I'm here to see my daughter," Jake demanded as I opened the door. Before I could respond, Vanessa pushed past me into the house. Her nose wrinkled as she looked around. "My God, Jake," she said loudly, "this place is like a homeless shelter. And these old people? They're practically worthless." I saw red. How dare she insult my parents, who had welcomed me with open arms when I had nowhere else to go? "Get out," I hissed, my voice shaking with rage. "Both of you, get out of my house right now." Jake's face twisted with anger. "You can't keep me from my child, Irene. I'll take her from you, just wait and see." As I slammed the door in their faces, I knew this wasn't over. Jake and Vanessa wouldn't stop until they'd taken everything from me. I needed to fight back. That night, I called my father's old police buddy, now a private investigator, named Frank. "I need dirt on Jake and his new girlfriend," I told him. "Anything you can find." Frank's investigation yielded more than I could have imagined. Vanessa, it turned out, had a colorful past as an escort, living off rich men's money. But that wasn't all. She was currently embezzling from Jake's company and selling insider information to their competitors. Even more shocking, Frank uncovered evidence that Jake himself was far from innocent. He'd been siphoning money from the company into offshore accounts for years. I had the power to bring Jake and Vanessa's world crashing down around them. But I wouldn't act rashly. No, I would bide my time, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash this information for maximum impact. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. I was surprised to see Elizabeth Thornton's name on the caller ID. With some trepidation, I answered. "Irene," Elizabeth's cold voice came through the speaker. "My birthday is next weekend. I expect Lily to be there. You may accompany her if you must." Before I could respond, she hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, a plan forming in my mind. This was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. As we approached the Thornton mansion, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Richard answered the door, his face a mask of polite indifference. "Ah, Irene. And little Lily, come in." The room was filled with the Thorntons' high society friends, all giving me curious looks. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. Suddenly, the room fell silent as Jake entered, Vanessa on his arm. His face registered surprise at seeing me, quickly masked by a smug smile. "Everyone," he announced, "I'd like you to meet Vanessa, my fiancée and future wife." The room erupted in congratulations. Elizabeth and Richard fawned over Vanessa, showering her with compliments. "Oh, Jake," Elizabeth gushed, "Vanessa is simply wonderful. Such impeccable breeding and education. A much better match for you than, well." She glanced dismissively in my direction. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. But now was not the time to lose control. I waited until the excitement died down, then slowly stood up. "I have something to say," I announced, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. I pulled out the folder from my purse and turned to address the room. "You all seem very impressed with Vanessa. But do you know who she really is?" The room fell silent as I began to reveal the truth. I explained how Vanessa was living under a false identity, how she had no real education, and how she had worked as an escort, sleeping with rich men for money. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Vanessa's face had gone pale, while Jake looked like he might be sick. But I wasn't finished. "And that's not all," I continued. "Vanessa has been selling company secrets to your competitors. She's been embezzling money from the company accounts Jake so trustingly gave her access to." Richard Thornton's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Is this true?" he thundered, turning to Jake and Vanessa. Before either could respond, I delivered the final blow. "And Jake? Jake has been transferring company funds to offshore accounts for years." The room erupted into chaos. Richard grabbed Vanessa by the arm, practically dragging her to the door. "Get out of my house, you deceitful witch," he roared. "I'll see you in court for this." He then rounded on Jake, his hand connecting with Jake's face in a resounding slap. "You're fired, you ungrateful scoundrel. How dare you steal from your own family?" In the midst of the pandemonium, I calmly picked up Lily and headed for the door. As I passed Jake, who was holding his reddened cheek, I paused. "I told you you'd regret this, Jake," I said softly. "Goodbye." In the weeks following the explosive revelation at Elizabeth's birthday party, my life took yet another unexpected turn. One afternoon, I received a call from Richard Thornton. "Irene," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "Elizabeth and we'd like to speak with you. In person, if possible." Curious and slightly apprehensive, I agreed to meet them at a quiet cafe the next day. As I walked in, I saw them sitting at a corner table, looking older and more subdued than I'd ever seen them. "Irene," Elizabeth began as I sat down, "we owe you an apology. A big one." Richard nodded solemnly. "We misjudged you terribly. You saved our company, our reputation. We can never thank you enough." Over the next hour, we talked more openly than we ever had before. They shared their regrets, their shock at Jake's betrayal, and their hope for a fresh start. By the time we left the cafe, a tentative peace had been established between us. Life continued to evolve rapidly. Vanessa was arrested for fraud and embezzlement, facing not just a hefty fine but potential jail time. Jake, stripped of his position and his fancy apartment by his parents, left the state in disgrace. He would call occasionally to speak with Lily, but our interactions remained cold and distant. One day, Richard and Elizabeth invited me to their office. "We have something for you," Richard said, handing me an envelope. Inside was the deed to a small but lovely apartment in a nice part of town. "It's yours," Elizabeth explained. "A thank you for saving the company. And a new start for you and Lily." I was overwhelmed by their generosity. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept it," Richard said warmly. "And there's more. We'd like to pay for your education. You mentioned once that you dreamed of becoming a doctor?" Tears welled up in my eyes. "A cardiologist, actually. But I never thought." "Now you can," Elizabeth smiled. Consider it an investment in our granddaughter's future. And so, at 30 years old, I found myself embarking on a new journey. Balancing single motherhood with medical school was challenging, but I was determined to succeed. Lily and I settled into our new apartment, building a life that was entirely our own.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with Irene's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.